Hello everyone, welcome to Practical GCP. So Cloud Workstation is something I want to look into for quite a while. And today I finally had a chance to give it a try and then explore its features. And I want to share my experiences of what I think in terms of the benefit of Cloud Workstations and how you probably can use it to scale development teams. Okay, we'll explore what is Cloud Workstations, some of the key benefits, how to set it up. I'll show you a demo and some of the useful tips I found while trying it out, and then we'll sum it up. Okay, so what is Cloud Workstations? I don't want to bore you with all the details, but think it as you create a bunch of configurations, right, which is based on a base image Google has provided for you. So for example, you could get a workstation configuration with a browser-based IDE. This is based on VS Code. And then you could have a one that based on a PyCharm Pro, or you can have no IDE at all, right? So these are the configurations which you can apply when you create workstations. These are created in your Compute Engine VMs. So those are base images, which means you can use them, but you can also use your own, right? You can use these as the ones you get started with, but then you can apply, say, packages software on top of that. You can install things, and then you can use the custom images to create your workstation configuration. And then whenever you spin up the workstation VM, you have to choose one of these predefined configurations, then you can create it. So from the developer experience, you typically have two ways to use it. One way is you can use the browser-based IDE. That's actually, you can actually develop everything in the browser. This is the one I'll be focusing on today because I think the development experience is actually quite good, surprisingly. The other one is you can use your local IDE, such as PyCharm Pro. Then it uses something called the JetBrains Professional. So the JetBrains Gateway, which gives you a remote tunnel that you can actually develop everything locally on your laptop, but then getting into the workstation VM through a tunnel, through a remote connection. So all of your files, executions, everything is actually done in the remote VM, but your actual development is very much like what you were doing before on your local IDE. Okay, so I want to first of all talk some of the key benefits. I think one of the key points of using something like the Cloud Workstations is you have reproducible dev environments, right? So this is really useful for if you have a large group of people, especially when you have remote workforce, then it is very difficult to have a consistent environment on the laptop. Even you can make it work, and it will be very painful typically. And the other thing is, typically in the enterprise environment, in the enterprise setup, the security is very tight. So you can't just install whatever you like. And what one of the common issues you run into is you can't even, let's say, run a gcloud command sometimes on your laptop. So that would give you all of these restrictions that you can't easily get around. But with Cloud Workstations, because this all runs in the cloud, especially with the browser version, which I really like, to be honest, and you can install whatever you like in there, and you can restrict whatever you like in there as well at the same time. So this comes down to security. So the key is that you can actually making sure your image, right? This gets controlled all the way from your container image, which you apply to the Cloud Workstation operating system, what you get in the base IDs, the browser IDs, all of that stuff. You create a base image for that. So and also this means you can restrict to have no internet access or limited internet access. So this is all because it all runs within the Google Cloud environment. You create this thing inside a VPC network, and then you can easily restrict the network access and monitor the network traffic. So it makes the overall development experience a lot more secure. But last not the least, I think this is super useful because I think a lot of you would agree with me. It's very difficult to test your code sometimes when you actually want to test, with the real services. Some of these actually have a private IP, some of these have a private endpoint, which you can't easily, access from your local environment, right? And if you need a third party to help you out with something, then they might not even have your company laptop. They don't have your company VPN. then it gets extremely difficult to try to get them into the environment, in a controlled environment, controlled access, to actually work in collaboration with you to test the code. So, but obviously, if you have anything on a private Cloud Red endpoint or private IPs within your VPC network, well, there's not, it's either very difficult to configure, or you probably haven't got it configured at all. So this would actually give you a very easy, a very neat way to talk to a real service. So you even when you're doing development, you can actually see how exactly it's going to interact with those services. Okay, how to set this thing up? This screenshot is something I took on a configuration I've created, but it's actually really easy. I'll walk you through on the actual workstation configuration part, which is actually most of the work that you probably spend now. It'll still probably only cost you like 10 minutes, and then you can actually have most things ready and off you go. So let's walk through that. So this is the workstation configuration page. As mentioned earlier, you can see I've got one created. But let's just walk through the process. There's a few key things I want to mention to you, which I think is very useful to mention. You obviously give a name, and then you choose a cluster, right? So this cluster is something you can create with the network setting. You need to choose your VPC network. In this case, I've created one for Cloud Workstations. You choose your subnetwork. I already occupied the previous one. You can either use a public gateway or private gateway, which has a much more restrictive control. In this case, I use the public gateway, but later on I'll show you how you can actually disable the public IP, which means you still have, you can contain your ingress rules, and then only allow the egress rules with CloudNet. But this basically is a cluster you create, but it's not a Kubernetes cluster, right? Just keep that in mind. It's just a cluster it creates to manage all of your workstations. So I've already created one. Let's say you pick this one up. The quick start workstations is quite useful. So you can actually put a number of pool size you want to have in there. So it does have a cost, but if your development experience is you want it to be better, then you can increase the size, and it will make the startup time a lot quicker. The machine settings, you can see you have a vast amount of choices. In this case, I've got it in the London region, and then lots of different machine types that you can use for development. Also, keep in mind you can actually attach GPUs, so it's not like you just have to use CPU. So which means if you need to do some machine learning work or inference, then the GPUs might come very handy. All right, so this you can see you can apply the T4s in there, which is very handy. You can't have a lot, but it's enough for testing purposes. Right, and the cost saving, this is quite important, right? So the default is 2 hours, but you can easily choose between 30 minutes and 4 hours. This is basically when you stop using your workstation, and it basically just kill the VM, and you don't actually get charged for it. Your persistent disk is still there, so you're not going to lose anything when you next time you come back and connect, but it will in this case destroy your instances. You don't have to keep paying for it, which is very important in the evenings, right? Otherwise you have to write a script to do it. Okay, so this is the bit that is very important. I always tick this box to, obviously you can do this whole thing in Terraform, but I would say in this case you wanted to disable the public IPs, because there's no point for all of the, because your VPC network, you can enable private Google access, right? So on your VPC network, you basically any Google services, any Google APIs, you can access those via the private Google access. But when you need to access the internet, right, by default, if you tick this thing, then obviously you're not going to get access to the internet unless you set up a CloudNet gateway. But this is what you would much better do, because you don't have to deal with all of the network ingress rules of the public IPs. It's just not a good way to deal with it. So disable the public IP address, then you can use CloudNet to get internet access. Right? That's this part. The environment settings, you can see this is where you can choose either you want to use the base image or you can use the custom container image. If you use the base image, the one I used to set up is the base editor. So this is the one, it's basically a something built on top of VS Code. And this runs all in the browser To be honest, originally, I think this is going to be really horrible in terms of developer experience. But after I tried it for a while, it's actually really good and it's really easy to set up. I know a lot of you would disagree with me and you prefer your local development environment. But if you have a large workforce with lots of remote employees or contractors that working with you, I think this is really good enough for a majority of the use cases. I'll give you a demo on what it looks like. It's not just an IDE, it's a lot more than that, right? Obviously, there's other things you can do, right? But none of these other ones is actually the ones you can run in a browser. You can see this is a bit of a problem in terms of the ecosystem, right? So you can see that none of these actually supports the community editions. So this is the ultimate version of IntelliJ for Java, and then that's the PyCharm Professional for Python. But I think most of the Python community, the developers, you don't really need this, I guess, unless you do some more complex front-end full stack development. But in the field of data, you probably don't need any of these paid versions, so which means you can't use them at all, right? So that's a bit of a bummer. But you do have the option of VS Code, and this is the first one is. I think I saw another piece of documentation saying you can configure VS Code to remotely connect to the workstation as well, and then you do your local development on your laptop. But again, I haven't actually tried that. I need to read a bit more into that. But the one in the browser is basically VS Code. It's not that much of a difference. Obviously, you can do your own one. If you want to create your own container image, you can do that. Put it into artifact registry, and then you can load it in from there. Yeah, this is where you store, you create your persistent disk. There's a bunch of defaults. If you don't want to lose it when the things are destroyed, you can change it to retain, which means in this case, when the workstation is deleted, the disk is retained rather than deleted if you don't want to lose everything. But I guess most things will be in version control. You probably don't want to keep a lot of this stuff on your local machine anyways. Use the Google services such as BigQuery, GCS, data store to restore your state in those places rather than try to put it locally, because it's just one of these things not recommended to do due to this kind of local state issues, and could also obviously cause security issues. But yeah, so that's pretty much most of the things you want to set up with your configuration. The last one is interesting. So this is where it comes to scaling large teams. You can see what it says in here is grant access to this configuration to enable users to create their own workstations, right? So what this is interesting is you can actually delegate this to, let's say you have many different departments have their own teams. You can basically train the admins to give them access in here to say, look, I will, as the platform team, for example, I will maintain the images, the security and all the checks to make sure it's good enough to use. And then if you need any help, I can, working in collaboration to create the base images with more packages installed. But having said that, you can go ahead and create the workstations rather than this has to be created by the platform team. So this would allow to scale a lot better while you have a centralized team to control the security and compliance with your container images. And that's pretty much it. So, okay, so now I want to show you a demo on the online version of it and some of the useful tips that I've seen. Okay, once you've got the configuration selected, you can create a workstation. This is actually really easy. You create a workstation, you give a name, and you just pick one of your configurations, and then you click create. That's it. Once it comes up, right? So keep in mind, these things runs on your compute engine, right? Each time you create one, you can see there's a machine type. This will appear in your compute engine page. And you can see this is choosing the container image you've got in here. So once you created it, it will be initially in a state of stopped. But then when you run it, and then it will give you this button called launch. So this is quite interesting, because this is a browser version, right? When you create a launch, what it's going to do is going to open a browser with everything in here, right? So this is quite a busy interface, but this is basically VS Code. but you've got everything in there, right? It's a fully functional IDE inside the browser. So I'm not actually a VS Code user, so I'm usually using PyCharm on the JetBrains stack. But it took me a bit of time to get used to. But the feature is actually pretty rich, and it's not much different to what you actually use locally on a VS Code. I'll show you a few interesting things in there. So in here, first of all, this is not just an IDE. You've got a terminal as well, right? If you go into here, you click New Terminal, then you can see I've been previously playing with the, checking out my code. You can see I've checked out the big frames code that I've been doing previously. And here I've also got a virtual environment created. So I can just basically activate that. Look, now I'm in a virtual environment. So I can also open the folder. So in this case, I just want to go into, where am I going to go to? Repos, big frames, and then open this area, right? Then you have everything in your IDE, right? This is and you can also install all sorts of plugins. You can see this is the extensions. I've installed the opinionated Python formatter black. So this is the thing you can basically change all of this stuff inside the browser, and it will format your code. Something I'm gonna move things around, then I can format my code in here, right? You've got version control integration built in. If I change anything, let's say, I don't know, if I put full spaces in there, you can see it comes up in the version control integration. You can double click on this, then you can do your code review to see what you've changed. Yeah, that's some of the main things. Yeah, so I mentioned the terminal part. So this is really important to me. If you don't have a terminal, then obviously it's useless. But you can see this is your own environment, right? This is all yours. And right now at this, I'll come back to this later on about security on the best practice around this, on workstation access. But really, this is just yours, right? You can do whatever, you can check in whatever you can. I'm not going to do CD in there. You can do a SSH. You can see I've created my private key and public key and known host. This is just like you're developing locally. There's not much of a difference at all. And it's all happening locally. And this means you can whitelist your public key in GitLab or GitHub. Then you can do your development using SSH key, to authenticate, authorize with your GitHub, your version control side of things. But the other thing, right, this is interesting. Can you see there's a Duet AI? I know the quality is probably questionable at this stage, but as soon as you set it up, you've got Duet AI built in to this thing, right? And then you can just start talking to it. Hi there, right? Then on the side, problem getting response. Okay, that's not great. Okay, typically you can use Duet AI here when it works, but I was working on this yesterday, and I actually was working, and all the authentication and authorization is fine. So typically you have to basically you have to log in to your Google account first, and then it will connect to the Duet AI server. Then you can basically ask questions on the left, and then when you actually type in the code in the IDE, you can get assist as well. But today it doesn't work. I've actually earlier tried to start a new one. You can see I've got this one here as well. That's just a brand new instance I've got set up. That doesn't work either. It's basically the authentication error. It cannot connect to the server. Okay, I guess unlucky today. I hope they will improve the reliability of it. But when I was using this yesterday, I was actually quite happy with it because I can ask questions doing summaries on the left. It's quite handy. You just click this thing and then you can ask questions on the left. And then you can ask, can you write unit tests for this thing, things like that. So on the right, you can actually write code, just like what I was doing earlier. When you open the repo with the code, and then you can obviously just edit your code in here. So yeah, so it's quite elegant, this IDE in my view. It's quite similar to what you would do locally, but I guess this is quite subjective to what your experience is like. I'm usually a coder, does everything locally as well with my local IDEs. But with this thing, it doesn't really support the community edition of such as PyCharm. It is a bit annoying that you can't easily do this sort of stuff. Back to the summary. So there's a few things I want to mention. So first of all, the good. I think especially with the browser setup, it's really easy to set up. The whole experience took me probably an hour to get going, and then I started coding already. Checked out the repo, and started going with the code. The browser-based development experience, in my opinion, is not bad at all, especially when the code assist works. I think it's just in the browser is a little bit slower than you would normally experience. I still think that's the case. But with all the integrations in place, with how easy it is, you have a terminal in there as well. It's not just you don't have a terminal. You have a directory, you can put whatever in there. Yeah, I don't really see this what's missing. Yeah, so that's my experience. You can test your code with real services. So this is really key thing because you're running within Google Cloud. And that's how you can actually interact with these other services. If I remember correctly, I don't see any documentation referring to this, but based on everything I've read so far, this whole ways of working, right, that you're logging into a workstation is based on identity federation. So what that means is the workstation runs based on a specific service account, which I've created in the setup process. But that service account doesn't really have any permissions. The way it works is when you log in to a workstation, and then when you start accessing other services, it's pretty much like your Cloud Shell. Then you basically federated your permissions, and then through that service account, then you'll be able to access the Google services you as an individual would have permission to. So this is really useful because it's just basically like you're developing locally using the user credentials, not a service account, which is short-lived and is actually much better in this case. That's my understanding of it. I just think I'm pretty sure I'm correct, but I can't see any documentation specifically explaining this part. Okay, so the things may be bad or I'm not sure about. So time to create workstation configuration is really time consuming, right? I think, and it doesn't actually tell you much. The log doesn't really say anything. So you need to be patient. When you first create a workstation configuration, you're going to have to wait around 30 minutes, right? Just that's how long it's probably going to take. I remember just waiting there for about 30 minutes. There's nothing, and then it's just finished. Nothing was broken. It just takes a very long time. Maybe there's a lot it has to create, but I guess over time it might get faster. The fact that it does not support community version of IDEs such as PyCharm CE is a little bit annoying. If it does support that, it would be great. Then, especially as I mentioned, in the data ecosystem, not everyone uses a paid version of JetBrains. But you can use VS Code, especially the browser version, which is basically the same. But if you want to use it on your laptop, I think there is somewhere mentioning that you can set it up from your local machine, but I don't know how it works yet. So the way the JetBrains works is you get this thing called the JetBrains Gateway, and it uses the gateway to allow you to tunnel into this remote development environment. So that's how it works, but it does not work with the community edition. So this is a screenshot I took from the JetBrains FAQ, and it has confirmed this does not work with the community edition. The last thing, so I think this is something we need to be careful with when we're setting it up. So if you look at the workstation here, right? So when you're allocating permissions, right? If you go here, you can say edit permissions, and you can add, other people to get this role, right? To get workstation user role, and this can be a user or a group, right? There's nothing prevent you from doing that. But if you look at what this says in the documentation, the least privilege is to make sure you limiting the workstation access to a single developer, right? So I think this is pretty obvious. This, especially when I started creating this, like, hang on a second, if you allow 2 people or 3 people or a group of people to access single VM, does that mean people will have access to each other's tokens? I'm pretty sure it would be the case, because when you're going into the machine, it gives you the pretty much root level access, and then you will have a home user directory which everyone seems to be logging into, and that means if someone generates a key, then you can see it too, right? So that is a screwed up situation if you have admins in there, someone just steal your OAuth token because it's still valid for quite a long period of time. And then that's what I think is happening. So something you need to be really careful with when setting this up, to make sure there's a single workstation can only be accessed by a single developer. But it's quite easy to actually break this. So I think the only way to ensure that is potentially use Terraform. But then if you delegate to other teams to do this themselves, then it could still create this issue. So I'm not sure exactly what is the easiest way to prevent this. Yeah, so something to think about, but I think this is still a very important point, especially when you do remote development. The machine is not yours anymore. If you allow multiple people to get into there, then there could be a situation that tokens screwed up mixed up between different users. Okay, that's all I've got for today. Apologize for the code assist not working, but it did work when I tried it yesterday, so probably just the glitch on a weekend. Yeah, so thank you very much. I hope you liked it, and I'll see you next time.
Go out!